Data does more than document disparities. It can shape strategy, drive investment, and move communities to action. Coming up now on the Global Black Economic Forum stage, opinion writer of the Boston Globe, Eugene Scott. Co-founder and president, Solo Funds, Rodney Williams. Executive director, Black Futures Lab, Kristen Powell. And joining our panel in progress will be Michael Franklin, executive director of Speechwriters of Color.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's so great to see you all here to join us for this very important conversation at this very important time in our country, politically, socioeconomically, and I'm so glad to have these really great brains here to break down some very complex information for our guests and for people watching online who really want to know where we are and where we're going and what the data can tell us. And so, first of all, if you can introduce yourselves and tell people what it is that you work on and why it's relevant to this current moment.
Okay. Would you like to start?
Hey everyone, I'm Kristen Powell, Executive Director of Black Futures Lab, and we are building Black political power. One thing we're known for is our Black Census Project, so check us out at the table over there. It's the largest known survey of Black people. We've done it now 3 times. The last time we reached 211,000 Black people across the country, and this time we are doing it with 300,000 Black people across the country.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rodney Williams, co-founder at Solo Funds. Solo Funds, alongside the Global Black Economic Forum, commissioned a study that we call the Cash Poor Report. It's our 3rd year of the study, and the reason why we wanted to, influence this study was really to articulate how Americans face financial challenges. We really felt like the studies that were present didn't really answer key questions. Key questions like, what does it mean to be cash poor? What does it mean to have credit cards, make over 6 figures, but you still need loans? Where do you go for access to capital when you don't have a job? We answered a lot of these questions, and I can't wait to share more.
Hello. Hello. I'm Michael Franklin. I am the executive director of Speechwriters of Color. We previously partnered with the Global Black Economic Forum on a report evaluating building consumer trust alongside how AI is impacting that consumer trust in particular. I also am proud to be the Chief Communications Officer with the forum and have had the opportunity to help tell and advance some of the stories, particularly with the Cash Poor report that we've partnered on with Rodney and Solo Funds for the past couple years too. And I am so excited to really just dive into this a bit more, because when we think about all of the data in particular with these reports, being able to tell the story beyond the numbers and humanizing it is so, so important. And it also is a very beautiful full circle moment too, being up here with Kristen, because I used to work at Black Futures Lab and helped run the rollout of the second Black Census Project a few years ago. And so seeing the continued growth and actually their partnership here in this space this year too is also incredible. And so very excited and happy to be here too.
Awesome, so glad to have you. One of the great things about these gatherings is they do function a bit as a bit of a like family reunion, class reunion, and I've run into so many different people. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Eugene Scott. I'm an opinion writer for the Boston Globe covering national politics. And so I want to start first with something very political. What piece of data have you all discovered that is of particular interest to you that you think the political media has not given enough attention to? And I want to hear from all of you all on this one.
So I can speak to that. So the Black Census Project is doing a few things. We're understanding what messaging reaches Black people. We're understanding what narratives are being told about Black people and disputing that with the data. And one thing that we've been finding in each time is that Black people are less and less trusting of major institutions. That's not just elected officials and local government. They're becoming less trustful of religious institutions, less trustful of journalists, less trustful of local government. And what that tells us is that we have to have a different strategy of how we're going to reach our folks. We can't have the same tactics that we've been doing for the last 40 years to get Black people out to vote. We have to meet them where we are, but we also have to deliver what we say we're going to do. Otherwise, we're breeding the same mistrust.
I think the biggest thing is the wealth gap. It's growing. It's the largest that it's ever been. And I know social media would give you the impression that Black folks and people of color are doing extremely well, which I do believe, but they're not doing as well as our counterparts, and it's getting worse, right? And that's a real reality. I think the other part that I would talk about is this concept of being cash poor. We may all hear it, but then I don't think that we all understand that we are cash poor, right? If any of it, you do have an emergency, if that emergency knocks out your savings or requires you to then use credit, you are now cash poor. And we should understand that being cash poor is at a disadvantage. That means you're not growing your wealth. That means many, many things. And I think that's what I would want to communicate.
And one thing I would just add to that, this year with our test data of the census in 2026, the number one thing Black people said they wanted is to get debt free, which tells me that they're definitely cash poor of what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think the piece that I would want to add is particularly around communicating that lack of trust. Like, we see political media and institutions have created this institutional voice that we see across media, across academia, across politics that people just don't buy into, and especially young people and Gen Zers. And rather than trying to create something new or create something different, instead it's trying to make excuses of, well, this is what respectability and these voices should look like, but they no longer resonate, they no longer drive action, they no longer drive change, and there has to be a level of accountability toward the fact that that failure of voice has led to where we are now.
Yeah, I've seen that firsthand. I've been a journalist for more than 20 years, and I teach college students, and none of my students read or watch anything that I'm on. But that's in part because, to your point, the media has done a piss poor job of not just covering Black communities, but just this country more accurately. How do you find the lack of trust in institutions as presenting an obstacle to the work you're trying to do? When you go out and talk to focus groups or do surveys, do you get a lot of pushback? Are people nervous to tell you what they're really thinking and feeling and experiencing?
Yeah, they're definitely nervous. What I will say is the average person that we talk to is actually dying to talk to someone. They're actually been feeling ignored. They want to be in a conversation, but they're skeptical that their conversation is going to lead to anything. And so we can't just have a conversation. We have to have a long-term relationship where we're actually delivering for Black people. One statistic that was interesting this time, so in 2022, when we did the census, 82% of Black people identified as a Democrat. This time, 63% are identifying as a Democrat. And the number one thing they're saying to us is no one delivers for us. And so I think it's really important that we're not just getting them to open the door because they do want to talk, but we're actually figuring out how we deliver for them, especially at the local level.
You know, the trust factor was a basis in how we created my company, Solo Funds. It is a community finance platform that's built on peers. So that means people are lending and borrowing from each other. And we don't have this huge marketing budget. You're not going to see us on a banner. It's because people are talking to people. When they need a loan, they know Solo Funds is there. But also, if they want to grow their capital, they also know they can lend and grow their capital. So it's an approach that takes into consideration the lack of trust amongst folks, right? They tend to trust each other more.
And adding in, like, for me, like, I'm a Gen Zer, and so even as I've come of age to vote and all of the things, every election is the most consequential election of my life. Everything is vote or die. And while I might vote and the election leads to, like, things happening that aren't great for me and my community, I'm still here. And even the folks who are saying vote or die, I'm alive, but like you're not fighting for me. And it's like, I think so often of the quote, I believe it's from Maya Angelou, of I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And so time and time again, we're seeing people attempt to make these commitments, and it almost feels like it's a threat of like, if you just don't vote, hold your nose, whatever it may be, then you're gonna face these consequences. We're still facing consequences, and the folks that I'm told to vote for are not putting in any effort, any fight to try and deliver. And when we see that dichotomy and that contrast in particular, that's when it turns into these messages no longer land. Like, you can't trust these messages to make an impact when you're just seeing the same thing over and over, but there's not a change in tactic or a change in effort or a change in wanting to bring my voice or credibility of my generation's voice into leading that moment rather than just being a part of it.
I totally understand. The first election I voted in was the year 2000, which is when the vote or die phrase really took off. But it does seem like what we're hearing in this current moment, this next election, even the midterms, is in fact the most consequential election of our lifetimes. Do you feel like the people you're talking to understand that, or does the data suggest that this is an election that really could improve the condition of many of the people you're involved with?
Absolutely not. The average voter is not clear on that. And why should they be? Because we've been crying wolf like this whole time. So they don't trust us, and I don't think that's the message, that this is the most consequential election. I think if we're saying that, we've already lost the conversation. I think what's important is to listen to people and understand what is it that you want, and help them figure out from what you want to how you get there, whether that's a local school board race, because you're talking about education as being the most important thing, and you didn't know that there was a school board race happening right now, or like in Valdosta, Georgia, where we're organizing right now, people's utility bills are 3 times what they were 2 years ago. Some of them higher than their rent. They had no idea that there was a state election happening last year where they were going to be able to vote on who was in charge of their utility companies. And so, like, doing that string for people and helping them understand is what's most important.
You know, I will always say that I think the most important factor for anyone is their economic situation. And for me, and I think for anyone that's listening, the more economic power you control, the more of your destiny that you can control, the more you can impact a local election or any election. So for me, even, you know, as someone young or someone early in their career, as a small business owner, even someone living in poverty or low income, it doesn't matter. Your economic plan, you should have one, right? And everyone should have an economic plan where you're trying to figure out how every year you're gonna get better and be able to plan out what you want. Because number one, you're then gonna see the politician that meets that goal. You're gonna see the agendas that meet that goal. And everything should align to that goal on your economic position. I truly believe that.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize what you just said. Your local government needs to have an economic plan for you. And you need to know what it is, and if they don't have one, you need to be showing up at city councils, showing up at your county commission. The problem is your local officials don't have a plan. And so we're sitting there waiting for something to happen, and they have no urgency to do that.
And I think it's really a testament to even to the space that the forum always focuses on. Like, we have 4 pillars of the future of work, wealth, health, and democracy, because we know they all go together real bad. Yeah. Like, if you want to make good money, then like you got to make sure that you have that power and agency in your day-to-day life, and not only in making decisions about your body, but also being able to make your decisions at the ballot box for everything day to day. And if we're not focused on that economic position, then we're not going to be able to focus on our health. We're not going to be able to focus on our vote. And so all of them have to continue to go together. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck. We can't keep being siloed in this work either.
Glad we moved the conversation in this area. I covered national politics from Washington, as I shared, but the first half of my career, I was out in real America, and it's one of the places that I got to see firsthand how much local elections, local politics affect people's day-to-day lives in ways that they think Washington does. Is there an issue that you feel like local elected leaders need to be paying more attention to based on the data that you've seen? When you look at your research, you think, hey, mayors and city council people, county commissioners aren't talking about this subject enough?
There's one. There's basically a stat, and it's basically out of the average American, 7%, when they do have an unplanned expense, they cannot get access to a loan. And that 7% resort to crime. And it's a direct correlation. And that may be startling, but you should, if I'm a mom or a dad, I get laid off, or I'm a mom or dad and I have 2 kids and I have to feed them.
Sure.
There's only a couple days that your son or daughter is not going to be able to eat until you're going to go figure it out.
Yep.
And that economic conversation, I don't think people understand it. So when you don't have access to loans, in many jurisdictions, they actually restrict the access to loans. They even restrict access to loans that you would call predatory, like a payday loan. But I always tell the story of that dad or that mom, if they did not get a loan and they go without is significantly more expensive than anything you could charge. And if you don't understand that, you've lost. And I think many politicians are looking at they're looking at the fine print, and they're not going and talking to these consumers.
Yeah, I would stay on the economic train. What we're hearing across this country, especially in rural communities, is affordable housing. I don't think that's shocking to people, but one point I do want to make is that rural America is Black. I think on the national stage, rural America is painted as a white thing, and especially in the South, rural America is Black, and they cannot afford their housing. Large jobs are being taken out of their communities. Even in the Midwest where I live, in the Rust Belt, warehouses, the jobs that they were used to be able to rely on are leaving their community, and the wages are not keeping up with the housing prices, and there's no regulation on it. And so you see these small towns where rent is going $800, $900, $1,000, but the average income is less than $30,000. How does that math make sense? And the city government is kind of putting up their hands, and they're saying, well, that's the developers, but the developers are here because you let them be here. And so we have to be pushing back on city commissions and councils taking accountability for that.
And there's a couple pieces. So I was born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas, before going to school in D.C. Hey, I know that's right. And between being in Kansas City, something that's been really interesting back home is the public school district I grew up in has recently decided to ban phones in schools for students. And it's a continuing, permeating topic that's going on of whether students should be able to have access to phones in school, or is it distracting or impacting learning too much? And there's some people very passionately for it and very passionately against it. And we're starting to have to see school boards and local legislators make these decisions because it's something that's a priority to parents. The other is the data point of the growing distrust of AI. Sure. And I think both of these come down to the part of agency that individuals are having, because we're seeing a Google search browser now. We're not even able to put a normal search in without getting the AI results up top versus being able to scroll and have non-diluted results. And it's not something that they're letting you opt in or opt out for sometimes, but it's suddenly being there. It might be in your email or your Word documents where it's you like to get a test message or a test draft. And we're seeing people continuously start to lose trust in staple platforms like Word or Google or search engines or whatever it may be, because rather than having the agency to turn this on or off, it's just automatically being put in there. And those are the day-to-day topics that I don't think are being talked about enough in Washington, D.C. But instead, these are the things that when people are opening their phone or opening their computer, they're dealing with every day, or when they're sending their kids to school, and now their kids are getting that impact too. It's making a change that's not particularly for the better, but it's something that needs to be talked about to find out what people are experiencing and making sure folks have the agency to make the decision of how they're able to participate.
Yes, that's not a conversation I've heard in Washington, which is where I'm based and where I'm from. But my first reporting job was at the Kansas City Star. And so, but your point, Kristen, we were talking about the Midwest. One of the things as a, coastal elite that I'm very mindful of is just how little Americans know about America, right? I think even when you come somewhere like New Orleans is different from everywhere else that everybody else is from. And we talk very often about things that politicians and local leaders don't know about their electorate. But what's a data point that you've come across that you feel like most Americans don't know about other Americans? Because I often find myself talking to people and they get really frustrated that other people are voting differently than them, or thinking differently than them, or behaving differently than them. And it gets down, quite frankly, to them just not even understanding that people are different than them and just how different they are. So is there something you think about that you think, I wish more Americans knew this about their fellow Americans?
41% of folks that are cash poor make over 6 figures.
Wow. Can you say that again?
So 41% of Americans that are cash poor make over 6 figures. And it's a stat that's growing. So when we look at previous years, the 6-figure group is the fastest portion of the cash poor. This person went to school. This person may own a home, may have credit cards. This person goes to work every day. The challenge is that they're over-leveraged.
I was going to say, that's why they're cash poor, right?
They're overspending. So you would never think that someone that makes that much money needs $200, but after they pay their $3,000 mortgage,
college
and their
loans,
$500 car,
daycare,
and all the expenses, all of a sudden, they can't afford their grocery bill, and they need a loan. And that's a stat that I think, again, we can probably all relate to that scenario in some instance of our life. I always say that this also, the average American will have an unplanned expense 2 to 3 times a year. So that means 2 to 3 times a year, something is going to happen that's going to change your financial situation pretty dramatically. That could be a death in the family. It could be medical related. It could be a car
accident.
issue. Something happens where you did not plan, and all of a sudden your economic plan doesn't make sense. And you're challenged, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I didn't know I was cash poor because I couldn't sustain that emergency.
What about you all, to a stat you think most American, or piece of data that you think most Americans don't know about other Americans?
Yeah, I think to take it back to politics, I think most Americans don't know where Black people live.
Sure.
And so a lot of investment we're talking about is in the South, and rightfully so. Lots of Southern people are Black. However, over 1 million Black people live in Ohio, over 1 million Black people live in Michigan, over 1 million Black people live in Illinois, more than in South Carolina, right? But all this investment around Black voter turnout is in the South, and we're forgetting about people in the Midwest, people in the Northeast, even people out West. And the issue is when we're not invested in and we're not building relationships with our folks, they feel forgotten, they feel left out, and then they don't engage. And then you see millions of us not voting, and we all go, what happened? Well, we never spoke to them because we believed that they all lived in Atlanta. And so I think it's really important that we understand where our folks are. I mean, I'll just dig on my staff. Like when I tell people that I'm from Ohio, the first thing they say is, cornfields? What? Ohio? I'm sure they say the same thing about Kansas, right?
Wizard of
or
Oz.
Missouri. And so we have to tell people, no, like, we are a chocolate city over here in Ohio, and we are struggling, and no one seems to care.
And so I'm actually going to take this in a completely different direction, stat-wise, too. And so with speechwriters of color, we care a lot about public speaking and all. And so we've seen, surprisingly, that more people are scared of public speaking than things like snakes, heights, or even death. And it's interesting where it's like everyone loves to yap, or like oftentimes it might be internally with their family, but when it comes to a stage or a platform of putting your voice on the record, people feel a bit more worried, and it changes the perspective of how they navigate things, or that comfortability in speaking up. And we see that manifest itself not only in just like speaking on stages, but it might be speaking up to an elected official. It might be speaking up to a doctor who they are the expert, but they're questioning you because you're Black, or they're disregarding what you say. And so we've seen those fears happening right now, and we also see how that's impacted broader pessimism. That's impacting how people navigate their day-to-day life, whether it's the agency to make a decision about their job or their work, or whether it's their agency about engaging in politics. And so due to that pessimism, we're starting to look in to see how can we deal with this crisis of optimism right now, and how do we create messages and communications that make sense to be able to provide some sort of support, some sort of uplift, whatever it may be, because it's clear that we're not going to be able to keep the same playbook of communicating to people coming from a completely different place.
And
Well, I
just
can
one-
believe that because I think most people would be surprised by how many people in public speaking are anxious about speaking publicly,
We're on the
right?
stage.
Like I was going to say, you're on TV, you're worried about mispronouncing a word or saying something wrong. And so I imagine that that's even more so the case for most Americans. But you spoke about the crisis of optimism, and I would love to hear if you all have come across anything in your research that does make you hopeful, that does bring you some joy, that does suggest that things could be moving in a positive direction.
I think the one thing is that with the next generations, there's quite a bit of an unapologetic nature of folks, particularly young folks, who are not going to be bounded to the same systems, you know. And because of that, there's a lot of trying of new things. There's a lot of embrace of entrepreneurship. I believe it's more Gen Zers are looking at starting their own business or looking at their own type of trade school or apprenticeship rather than going your traditional pathway of trying to go to college and get a good job and climb the corporate ladder or try and stay in an institution. Like I remember when I started my business, my mom was like, whoa, what? Are you a stable paycheck? Like, where's that? But being unapologetic and being willing to take those risks, I think, is going to lead to some optimism, and we're starting to see there's just going to be new systems for how we engage and interact.
Awesome. And you two, what have you come across?
I like to call it the hustle economy, or it's the American hustle, right? It's a growing stat of when someone does need have an unplanned expense, they get another job.
Okay.
And that's what I call the American hustle.
Yep.
That means in the daytime they may be a teacher, but at night they're Uber driving, or they're a DJ that also does graphic design. They're part of the gig economy. What we see, I think, is 43% when an unplanned expense happens, they figure it out. And I thought that was powerful, right? So it's almost like, they're never going to catch someone slipping.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And people finding solutions to their own problems and not depending on lawmakers and elected officials to make their lives better.
And that's the stat, right? They're figuring it out. They may have a lack of trust, but they are confident in themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Kristen?
Yeah, and I would add to that, like we tested voter turnout in a few places last year in rural communities, and we had a 47% increase in Black voter turnout in communities that we stayed in long term. And what that tells us is that when we have a relationship with people, not only do they vote, but then they start getting engaged in their local politics. And so we know what to do. We know that people are hungry for it. We just have to invest. And I love what you said about public speaking, because one of the things that we are challenged by is so many people who want to be an organizer are afraid to talk to their fellow human being. And so we have to overcome that. But what's hopeful is that when you have a conversation with people, people want to talk.
Awesome. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you all, and I imagine that you've all enjoyed hearing them. Can you please give our panelists a hand? And thank you for being here. We're going to leave the stage, but please stay around. We have more panels for you. And if you're watching from home, follow our live stream and continue to stay engaged. Thank you.
Then 6 o'clock rolls around. You just finished wiping your car down. It's time to cruise, so you